Hello, today we are here with Matthew Gerstman, and he's a senior software engineer at Dropbox. We are happy to see you here, and thank you for accepting our interview. Can you give us a brief about your history and how did you start programming and these kind of questions?
Yeah, so I got really lucky. I was about 8 years old, and I was watching my friend's older brother, who was about 15, making a video game, and I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And he handed me these Learn Visual Basic tutorials, and I learned Visual Basic when I was very young. And then over time, I learned other languages that we use more day to day. Yeah, so that was how I first got started programming. I went to school for it, and then when I graduated, I was at a startup in California. I realized I didn't belong in California, so I moved to New York. I was at a different startup there for a little bit, and then I really wanted to work for kind of like a big, popular tech company, so I got myself into Dropbox.
When did you get close to TypeScript? So what was the decision behind moving to TypeScript, or what do you see as an advantage?
Yeah, so I mean, I was just kind of told I was learning it. It's what we were using when I got to my current job, so I just was like, I'm going to start learning this. And in the first few months, it very much got in my way. I constantly found it annoying, and now I can't live without it. It's one of those things that like once you really get used to using it, like you can't give it up.
Well, what do you think for others? How do you see how long does it take to switch?
I think it's gotten a lot better over time. A big question is, are you the first person in your organization writing TypeScript? Is this a brand new project? Are you migrating an old project? There's a lot of kind of like different routes you could go that could make it harder or easier. For example, if you're just starting a brand new project, then you'll probably start learning things very quickly. If you are trying to shoehorn TypeScript into a giant code base that already exists, you're going to run into new challenges and like have trouble integrating things and then the other question is like, are you the first person in your team or just like in your community that knows it? So if you're teaching yourself based on docs on the internet, which are hopefully in your native language, then like it's gonna be more challenging. If you are, joining a company and you're surrounded by smart people who already know TypeScript, you have someone you can ask questions to and you can learn it a lot quicker. So there is definitely a learning curve. It kind of depends on what environment you're in, of how steep it is.
Okay, we saw your presentation and it was really great.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing it. But there were like some really specific questions that came up from the audience, and I think that might be interesting for our crowd as well. So how do you deal with not type dependencies in TypeScript?
Yeah, so there's kind of two ways that you have to look at that. First of all is there's your third-party dependencies, which are, React, Redux, whatever. And then there's the things that are built in to your code base that might be written by another team or maybe just something you wrote a long time ago. And those could also be considered dependencies. So as far as like third-party libraries go, you can pull from this repo called Definitely Typed, and many libraries are available there with types. But let's say it's your code or it's a small library that hasn't been typed. There's kind of then again two options. So you can create these things called .d.ts files, which are very similar to header files in like C or Java, and you can either thoroughly type what all the functions should look like in this library or all of the interfaces should look like, or you can just say, hey, when I'm using this library, just trust me that I know what I'm doing, and you don't get type safety there, but it will work and interop with your other code that is at least kind of type safe.
I see, thank you. So when we compare TypeScript and Flow, what would you highlight as a developer? So why would I choose TypeScript over Flow?
Yeah, the big thing really is the community. If you're looking at like the actual implementation of both, I think they are both great products, and I don't think on like the pure technical merits we're going to say that one is clearly better than the other. But TypeScript has just achieved much stronger adoption. It has many, many more users, many more libraries are available in TypeScript, and it's easier to find resources these days. And it appears from the outside that Microsoft is pushing more on open sourcing TypeScript than Facebook is on Flow. So I would just say that like it's really about the community. That's why I would choose it.
Thanks. You were talking about tests, a lot about tests. So can you give us a brief, what was in your presentation before on stage, just a brief for the audience.
You know what's funny is I really believe you should write tests. I do not claim to enjoy writing tests. But I think what a lot of it comes down to is there's a lot of misconceptions about problems TypeScript is going to solve. And I also think that as developers, we just get very excited about things and we like to claim that this is going to fix all of our problems. And I just wanted to be very, very clear about what problems it doesn't fix. So like there is a little bit of overlap in that types will help make your code self-tested a little bit. But I still really believe in integration tests, especially something that runs in an engine like Jest. It doesn't have to be Jest, but is like testing your code, how it's actually going to be run to the user. So if the user is going to click something, dispatch a click. That's how I generally write tests. But I don't claim to be an expert on that subject.
Okay, thanks. Matthew, you mentioned in your speech TypeScript is not sound. Can you help out with that?
So the reason I say TypeScript isn't sound is because we can't always guarantee that everything is 100% type safe in TypeScript. So one of the biggest obvious examples is that you can use an any. There are a lot of interrupts for kind of untyped code, and you just can't guarantee that everything is typed perfectly. The other thing is TypeScript is constantly keeping up with JavaScript itself. So it's as a result of being a superset of the language, it's inherently going to have the same warts as JavaScript itself. Kind of opposite end of the spectrum that is sound is ReasonML, which is a very different syntax that compiles into JavaScript, but is not the same code as JavaScript. So it has a much bigger learning curve, and you can't necessarily do all of the same things, but you get that soundness and type safety at compile time. So that's the trade-off you're making there.
Okay, thank you. So in your talk, you were talking about small and big teams. I would be really interested in that case as well. So what happens in a small team and what happens in a big team?
Yeah, I've worked in both. I've worked with, I've worked on teams or companies that had, 5 or 10 engineers, and now I work somewhere that has many, many hundreds of engineers. And it's kind of like you have to scale communication. So when you're a 5-person team, you can probably all sit in a room, you can probably all sit on 2 couches, and you can code together. And if you want to do something really funky and write the craziest functional code you could possibly imagine, like you can do that and you can communicate to the 4 other people in the room and say, this is how it works, and then they all understand it. But if there's 900 other people who aren't physically in the room with you and maybe not even in the same geographical location as you, you're going to have to figure out how to scale these things. So TypeScript is super helpful in kind of both examples. So part of TypeScript is it protects you from yourself, right? You don't remember how all the code you wrote 6 months ago works, and chances are you think the code you wrote 6 months ago was garbage just because we always do. So it very much protects you from yourself in that case, and that it's when you go and use some old thing in a way that you didn't anticipate, but you forgot that you didn't anticipate it, it's going to help you catch that, and it's going to help your teammates catch that as well on a small team. It definitely becomes much more valuable as you have hundreds and hundreds of engineers, because then you're dealing with issues where 2 teams have spent months discussing what is the exact interface between their products and how they're going to work and how we're going to launch these things, and TypeScript will help you enforce that. And that's what I talk about in my talk with contract validation. So yeah, it has many benefits for small teams and then even more for bigger teams.
Okay, thank you very much. If we would like to emphasize something really a big advantage is that from a usability point of view, from the developer's persona, you would more recommend TypeScript than JavaScript because you have these comparisons that you have actually described before, if I understand it well.
Yeah. So what I also like to be clear about is I really just recommend whatever you think is best for your requirements. And I kind of like to emphasize that, and that's why I very much in my talk focus on the fact that it's just another tool. One screwdriver might be better than another for a certain use case, and one might not be as advanced as the other, but like you're going to use them in the right environment. So, for example, if you have never written TypeScript and you have a client that is not going to pay you if you don't get your project out in the next 2 weeks, I am not going to tell you to switch to TypeScript. That sounds like a terrible idea.
Do your usual stuff.
Right, but if you are doing a side project, or if you are building something that you expect needs to last 3 years, or you have the time to go learn a new thing, then yeah, you probably do want to use it. And the other thing I found is that most engineers who use TypeScript end up not going back. So they start using TypeScript and then they're just like, oh, I can't live without this now. I don't remember how I lived without it. But you have to get past that learning curve first. And I don't know. It's up to you to decide if it's worth it for the project you're on.
Okay. So best part, what tools you recommend using TypeScript? Can you give us some hints? Or environments to work with, or what's your favorite setup? These kind of things.
Yeah, I am an Apple fanboy. I tend to use 3 monitors just because that's who I am. I really love VS Code. I use the traditional terminal, which I'm just aware I should be using something better. By that better, I mean like iTerm or like some other shell. But yeah, I'm really into VS Code. It's like my favorite thing that exists right now. And then just like any form of live grep, which allows you to just like really actively grep your code base. Those are most of the tools I use. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm just most excited about my editor. I mean, React is great. I actually am a big fan of Redux. I've spent a lot of time reading about Redux, and I give other talks on that. Yeah, I try not to be dogmatic about my tools.
Okay, I'm fine with that. But it's always good to ask someone who's really.
If you wanna watch me get very frustrated in a short period of time, put me on a Windows machine.
Okay, I see. So, how do you see the future? Next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, years?
So next 3 months, it is October, so we're gonna have the holidays, and no one's gonna get anything done.
True.
And next 6 months, we're going to have incremental features on all the things we have, like we have. And let's talk 3 years, because I think that's really interesting.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things that are currently underway, and I think we're about to watch history repeat itself in the browser. So if you look at something like jQuery or Lodash, those libraries, jQuery has become something that everyone hates. And Lodash is slowly becoming that. But the thing is the reason no one likes jQuery is because most of the features that were in jQuery are now part of the browser, so it's not solving any problems anymore. It just exists for problems that no longer exist because they've ascended into the browser. And I think Lodash is roughly doing that with like map and just all the ES6 functional features we get. So I think we're going to see the same thing at some point with JSX or with React or with all these frameworks. Like some of this technology is going to become a part of the actual browser itself. I believe her name is Nicole Sullivan. She gave a great talk at React Rally about how the browser teams were working with the framework teams to make the browsers perform the best for the frameworks. So I think it's just very likely that we're going to see a lot of these features that are currently in React become a part of the JavaScript runtime, and then we will have new problems to solve at the framework level. Right now, my eyes are very much on Svelte. I haven't gotten a chance to write it, but it seems to be the most unique approach to solving these problems in JavaScript, in that all the other previous frameworks are about the virtual DOM or about all the other things, and Svelte is about let's compile back down to raw JavaScript and not ship a runtime. And I think that is really, really interesting, and that's really what I'm watching at the moment.
Okay. What are you looking when you're hiring someone? So what would be those things that you shouldn't miss out, or how do you hire?
Yeah, so I actually wrote a blog post on this on my personal website. So if you go to matthewgerstman.com/tech, if you don't go to /tech, you'll find a million theater posts because I love Broadway. I wrote a lot of information about interviewing and kind of about being a candidate and like thoughts about that. But I'll give you some highlights now. So I don't really care what tools you come from. What I actually care infinitely more about is that you have proven that you know a lot about whatever tool you're using. So if you're using Go or you're using Ruby or PHP or Python or whatever, it really doesn't matter to me. What I care a lot more about is that the tool you've showed up with in the interview is the tool that you know best. Don't try to impress me with your choice of tool. Show me that you are good at your trade. And once you've proven that you can learn one thing well, I'll just assume that you can learn other things well.
I see. What do you think? So the community is developing quite hard, I think, all around the globe, and we see these kind of conferences popping up. Not this quality, but it's a really rare event. But what do you think? Is it hard to find good developers today, or is it getting a bit better than before, or it's just higher competition all the time?
I think we have a constant. First of all, we never have enough engineers. It's a huge problem. We also, just as an industry, we've kind of acknowledged that the interview process is broken, but we haven't done much to fix it. I would really love to see, personally, a better system of apprenticeships for people on their second careers. Because especially in America, where we're trying to hire more diverse candidates and not just the same the same people who look all the same for any given company. I would like to see us giving those people apprenticeships and figuring out how to replace the college internship that many more privileged people get, and doing something there. Maybe that's not the solution, but I would really like to see that problem solved, because I think that's one of the ways we'll address global equality as well.
I see.
So the biggest piece of advice I give to engineers of every single level or seniority is find mentors who are just a couple of years ahead of you, 2 or 3 years ahead of you. And ideally, they're mentors who have a similar background to you or have been through similar things, because a lot of the time, I've been doing this. I mentioned earlier that I've been coding since I was a little kid, and I got very lucky. But I often talk to bootcamp grads who've only been coding for 6 months, but they could be very good at their jobs. The problem is that I am not the best person to give them that advice, because I've been doing this for so long, and I don't remember what it was like to be in their shoes. Mm-hmm. But if you find someone who has just recently solved the problems that you are dealing with, then they will be able to give you the advice to get farther. And that's why most of my mentors are, just 2 or 3 years older than me, or 2 or 3 years ahead of me in their career. And most of the people I mentor are just 2 or 3 years behind me, because I know exactly what they're going through right now. I remember going through it, and I'm able to give them advice, and same for my mentors. So that's what I really recommend, is just finding good mentors who are just a couple years ahead of you, and then always be paying it forward. Always be helping out, the more junior developer, and doing whatever you can for them.
How do you like the conference?
This is a thoroughly impressive conference. Unbelievable. So I have personally set up events for over 1,000 people, and I know how much work goes into it, and nobody knows if anything went wrong except for the organizers. Something might have gone wrong, but none of us know that. And that is how you know this thing has been very, very successful. Yeah. I really look forward to seeing the next 2 days.
We too. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.